Greetings to everyone. I welcome you all to today's lecture on traditionalism and female bhaktas. Presently we are discussing Bhakti movement with reference to women participation. As we are going to focus on the aspect of traditionalism and how that particular aspect impacted the psyche of the female bhaktas, let us talk about the emotion of bhakti. So, at the heart of the bhakti movement was the desire for human freedom. Its poetry in different languages communicated both spiritual as well as material equality, as has been pointed out by the scholars Tharu and Lalita. It sought to infuse the knowledge of the spirit into the lives of the common men who were invariably oppressed. So, the path of bhakti demanded that the bhakta forego culture in every form and shape. So, what emerged as a result of this tendency was some kind of a counter culture, as has been pointed out by Kenneth Rexroth. Kenneth has defined the counter culture as those people who lived by the tenets of lyrical poetry, and this is what exactly set bhakti apart. So, these bhaktas were resolved to match poetry and life and to sing the way life was being lived, or to sing the way they wanted their life to be. So, they lived by their songs. The poets of the bhakti tradition drew from the so-called little tradition and greatly subverted or partly challenged the great tradition. Now, it is in this background that one can also discuss as to how several bhaktas started singing unfettered and uncontrolled. They employed the dramatic qualities of the human voice, the refusal to bow down to caste and gender hierarchies, which was quite apparent in the traditions of bhakti poetry. The female bhakti poets were not content to sit in their homes or to tend to their families or their household chores. So they came out, they were brave and valorous. They embraced the life of the nomad, traveling to far off lands for the sake of finding true knowledge, and the verses of bhakti refused to be tied down to traditional parameters. So, the songs of bhakti caused upheavals in the family as well as change within the clans across kingdoms, and several bhaktas were brave enough in their poetry. They talked about the way they wanted to live, and how they were not ready to accept the traditional way of life. Now, a number of religious sanctions had been laid on the free movement of women. A woman's sexuality was synonymous with guilt as well as sin. It was outrageous for a woman to acknowledge any kind of sexual desire or even talk about the sexual act. The suspicion of promiscuity was enough to call for any kind of religious sanction and even violence against the women, and we have seen now that how this trend had started from ancient Indian times onwards. So, the medieval theocracies projected something like a state within a family, and they replicated the model of the state. The woman was the metaphorical motherland that had to be protected against invasions at any cost. So, in this background, women soon became non-entities, and the country witnessed a series of major political transitions from the 8th century CE to the 19th century, when the Bhakti movement was in full sway. So, from theocracies, the states developed into colonies, and through the influence of nationalism to nation states. And throughout this process of transformation, women remained disenfranchised non-entities. So, it is interesting to look at the subject of women in the background of Bhakti movement. In the political sphere, women had been reduced to functional symbols, while in the theocracies, women were non-standard subjects of patriarchal rule. During the colonial period, women became symbols of India's degenerating morality. So, the gender implications of Bhakti movement can be understood with reference to the kind of images of women that were being perceived in Veer Shaivism. Bhakti movement didn't mean equal rights and privileges for women, though the movement greatly professed egalitarianism. As has been pointed out by a contemporary commentator, Malanna, a woman was considered impure because of her monthly menstruation. Her powers of procreation and attraction were largely looked down upon as the greatest hindrance to a man's spiritual progress. Now, talking about the influence of traditionalism and patriarchy on Basavanna's Vachanas. By Vachanas we mean the verses or the sayings that most of the saints shared with their followers. So, the traditional patriarchal perceptions that found reflection in his verses are as follows. To give me birth, Maya bore me as mother. To delight me, Maya was born as my daughter. To embrace me, Maya shared my bed as my wife. So many different ways she has. Maya to worry and trouble me, not in my power to unhinge this Maya. So, these lines clearly indicate that how the versatile roles played by a woman were projected in a negative light rather than being appreciative about the different roles that a woman could play. Then another Vachana indicates this, that a woman's speech is like dark sugar, but I have seen, O Lord, strong poison in her heart. She will invite one lover with her eyes, another man is hidden in her heart. O Lord of the meeting rivers, listen, one must not trust woman, thief of men. So, in these lines, the inference that these male poets or bhaktas they drew was that a woman was nothing but a thief of men who was always on a lookout for developing relations. However, if we look at the interpretation of the female bhaktas, both male saints like Jedara Dusimaya and the female saints like Gogave and Satyaka questioned the entire concept of gender and patriarchy. Gogave said in one of her vachanas, they call one woman if one has breasts and a braid. They call one man if one possesses a moustache and a loin cloth. Is knowledge of these two male or female? So, basically the question about this male identity or the female identity was raised by several female bhaktas who refused to be bowed down by that kind of discrimination. So, Jadara Dasimaya's Vachana rejected both gender as well as caste paradigms, and the following Vachana indicates that did the breath of the mistress have breasts and long hair, or did the master's breath wear the sacred thread? Did the outcast last in line hold with the outgoing breath the stick of the tribe? So, basically the symbols like the stick which an untouchable was supposed to carry when they were passing the pathway, or the sacred thread that was donned by the upper castes, did it really make a difference to the breath that a human being was taking in order to stay alive? Now, another concept which seems to be relevant when we are discussing this is that of Shakti Vishisht Advait. Shakti Vishisht Advait lies at the root of Lingayat philosophy and is in fact used as an alternative name for Veer Shaivism, which was a very important branch of Bhakti movement. According to this, while Shiva by himself reflected purity and purity in the state of rest, the entire creation took place only through his symbolic relationship with Param Shakti or Maya, who herself emanates from him. So unless and until there was a union between the two, between the Shiv and the Shakti, the powers of Shiva lay hindered or hidden, and the powers were able to come of their own only after this kind of a union. Now this completely overturned the Brahmanical and the patriarchal idea of caste pollution and also gender inequality, since nothing could originate only from the pure form. So the pure had to intermingle with the impure to create something and to bring about any kind of creation. So these ideas definitely were transcending the notions of gender. The ultimate development in the Shakti Vishisht Advait of Veer Shaivism was the devotee turning androgynous, and in the process of transcending gender itself, so neither male nor female. So Prabhu Deva, in stating Akka Mahadevi's unique spiritual attainments, says, shedding her corporal traits, she has become united with Linga. So, in due course of time, I would also be discussing in detail the various features of bhaktas, the female bhaktas associated with Akka Mahadevi, and how she brought about a new genre altogether. So, the verse says that she has become herself the supreme light. I say, hail to the majesty of Mahadevi Akka, who has, shedding the sense of self and other, become one with the Linga itself. So this was really appreciated by other contemporary female bhaktas. However, they also pointed out to redundant gender differentiation. All the Veer Shaiva Vachanas made it clear that given the Shakti Vishisht Advait, which was the guiding philosophy of Veer Shaivism, there is no gender or caste differentiation, and the notion of purity and pollution became irrelevant because of this philosophy. So one can say that Veer Shaivism emerged as a great leveler in society, and in the early stages of its development, Veer Shaivism acted as as an egalitarian force, as Basava was a Brahman, whereas Satyaka was a sweeper and Kakaiya was a butcher, and they all argued on equal terms. They all were known as bhaktas in the debating assembly called Anubhava Mantapa. Alamma Prabhu, regarded by his contemporaries as even greater than Basava, was the son of a humble temple servant. So this shows that here was a religious movement which was kind of accommodating people belonging to different castes and communities. However, the dichotomy of restricted equality still remained with reference to the roles of women. Veer Shaivism did not allow women to conduct priestly ceremonies nor become head of a Veer Shaiva Math or religious organization. This exception clearly indicates the subtle layer of inequality which remained hidden behind the Veer Shaivite egalitarianism. By the later part of the 12th century, this inequality surfaced not only in terms of gender but also in terms of hierarchies. Now coming to the social background of Veer Shaivite women saints, an analysis of the Lingayat women saints reveals certain patterns. Most of them belonged to the 12th century, and all these women were Vachana writers. 34 women have been listed as Veer Shaivite saints, and in terms of gender division, they roughly comprised 1/3 of the important Veer Shaivite saints of this period. And out of these, the social background of 25 has been identified. Scholars like Vijaya Ramaswamy have indicated that how there was an attempt to kind of restrict the free movement and also the free spread of ideas of such female bhaktas. Among these, as many as 72% were marginalized castes, primarily artisan castes, and also some belonged to untouchables. This therefore constituted the dominant social group under Veer Shaivism, and the trend was similar for male and female bhaktas, more or less. The marital status of these Veer Shaivite women saints showed their reaction to marriage as well as familial relationships, which explains partly the reasons behind their venturing into the path of spiritualism. So 14 out of 32 were unmarried, comprising almost 43% of the total women saints. Neglection of women and low castes definitely seems to be a very important factor behind such a step that was being taken by these women. Veer Shaivism, despite its radical ideology, essentially emerged out of the given social conditions, which was dominated by patriarchal value system. Within this framework, both women as well as low castes were denied the path of spirituality as well as salvation. Now, coming to the issue of dual deprivation, even among the marginalized social categories, women suffered a dual deprivation. Firstly, the Brahmanical restrictions regarding the unsuitability of the spiritual path for women was there to stay. Secondly, the social ostracism or the boycott of deviant spiritual women in a gender oppressive patriarchal situation also played a very important role. As a result, different standards were set for male and female bhaktas, and in the search for salvation, the deviant behavior on the part of a low caste male was still acceptable within the patriarchal framework. However, a similar situation, if a woman who was a low caste woman and who wanted to adopt the path of bhakti and however was confronted by male antagonism, whether in the form of her husband or father or brother, and was not really accepted easily in the family atmosphere. So, the female bhaktas had no option but to opt out of family and from married life. Spiritually inclined women therefore gave up their married family lives, and they refused to be dominated by the traditional norms as well as the patriarchal family structure. Now, this deviant behavior by women in the spiritual fields was also true for similar religious movements earlier, such as the Bhagavata movement or Buddhism and Jainism, which has already been discussed in some of the earlier lectures. So, we can say that Veer Shaivism, however, differed from these other devotional streams in that not only do many Veer Shaivite couples found equal importance in the Lingayat canon, but even the unmarried and the deviant women like Akka Mahadevi and the prostitutes like Sangamma, Sula Sankavve and Vajja Kavve, they managed to create a sacred space for themselves. So, this was definitely a huge achievement as far as women belonging to the marginalized sections were concerned. Now, another very important theme that emerged was Sharana Sati Lingapati. So, a guiding feature of Veer Shaivism was this belief, meaning that Sharana, or the spiritual aspirant, whether it was male or female, was always the virtuous wife, and Shiva was the eternal bridegroom. In the context of women who left their homes or who rejected the ties of marriage, their devotional outpouring, however, continued within the familial paradigm, as has been pointed out by the scholar Ramanujan. The only difference was that now her family consisted of the divine family and Shiva was her husband. The Guru was her parents, Jangamma was the father-in-law, and the Shiva Sharanas were the relatives, and she was herself the Sati. So this was the kind of divine familial ties that these female bhaktas preferred to develop rather than the worldly ties. However, this can also be described as a paradox, because it was paradoxical that these women who had rejected the patriarchal structure at the worldly level continued to operate within the framework of patriarchy at the spiritual level. For both men and women, the symbol of worship was the male linga. The only attempt to see the linga as a woman was made by Basavanna and not by any of the women Veer Shaivite saints. Now, coming to our discussion on a very important female bhakta, Akka Mahadevi. She was a woman saint who conceived of a metaphorical family. As Akka Mahadevi remarked, I have Maya for mother-in-law, the world for father-in-law. I have 3 brothers-in-laws like tigers, and the husband's thoughts are full of laughing women. No God, this man, and I cannot cross my sister-in-law. Now, this kind of a vachana clearly indicates her disdain, her outright rejection of this worldly marriage, where each and every member of her family was probably misbehaving with her or ill-treating her. So, therefore, she was feeling awful and she completely rejected them. Now, while we are discussing this with reference to the worldly family, to the earthly family, but there is also adherence to patriarchal notions when one comes to the heavenly family. So, therefore, we cannot really conclude that the female bhaktas were outrightly inspired by revolutionary ideas. There were limits and restrictions, and the influence of patriarchal traditions was to be found on their thought processes as well. Thank you.